Among the security reforms touted in the aftermath of September 11th was tighter scrutiny of non-Americans who are living in the U.S. on student visas. Today, however, the New York Times reports that any meaningful tracking system is still at least a year away. Joining us now to talk about the process and the principle as well are Ibrahim Hooper. He's with the Council on American Islamic Relations, and Dan Stein with the Federation for American Immigration Reform. Both of them are in Washington. Gentlemen, thank you very much for coming in and talking with us this afternoon about this topic. Mr. Hooper, I would like to begin with you because, as I understand it, your stance on this issue, you are against what's being proposed as this monitoring system for students who are coming in from outside the country. But when you look at what happened here back on September 11th, the biggest terrorist act to ever hit this nation was perpetrated by those who were here on those particular visas. Why doesn't it make sense to actually target people who are using that visa to get into the country?
Well, first of all, I don't think all of them were in on student visas. I think a few of them were. But I think the main point is that we see this as an extension of the profiling issue, whether it's at airports, whether it's by the Immigration Service, whether it's by the Justice Department in terms of the detainees. I think inevitably what you'll have when you have 500,000 of these students, they're going to say, well, we can't focus on all of them. We're going to have to focus on the Muslims and the Arabs. And that's what they're saying with airport profiling and all of these other policies.
Mr. Stein, how about that?
Well, no, the issue here has to do with whether the government is going to protect the American people by making sure that people who come in on student visas don't want to do bad things or otherwise comply with their visas. I think it's only fair the American people realize that we are years away now under the proposals of the current Congress, the ones that are being talked about, even now, years away from anything really being done to make sure that these technical schools and these training schools and these universities, these open admission universities, actually have to fulfill their requirements to report to the INS if the student doesn't show up, if the person's doing something inconsistent with their visa status. We have total chaos in the system right now, and as the New York Times points out, unless we have a serious national commitment to make these universities and these other training schools comply with these new laws and ensure that the system is working properly, we're never going to know where these folks are and how many are here and whether they've ever left.
Let me ask you about that. I mean, the time that we're given then, in your estimation here, years before the system's actually up and running, gives us a chance to look at these controversies that are going to come up and avert them. Now, and the issue still is going to come up that Mr. Hooper here raised about the idea that you could be targeting racially one particular group of people, and how do you get around that problem?
But that's not, there's no issue been raised of that sort. You want to deploy resources rationally. If you've got students or people coming from a country that's a belligerent of the U.S., harbors known terrorists, sponsors state terrorism, naturally you want to deploy resources more carefully to monitor those folks than you would people from countries than you would from people. I'm not agreeing. I'm agreeing that you have to. No, I'm saying you have to. No, that's exactly not what I said at all, and that's a total misrepresentation of my point of view.
I think we missed the point also that these students are a bridge to the rest of the world. If there's a negative perception of America in the rest of the world, hundreds of thousands of students going back home with a positive image of America is going to help our image worldwide.
But that issue is not even an issue here now. What we're talking about is, look, are we going to have some foreign students? Yes. Are we going to have hundreds of thousands of people? We don't know who they are. We don't know if they show up for school. Is that the process we're going to continue? Are we going to let people come here on student visas and get flight training or engage in activities inconsistent with the national interest? No, those are the basic questions, and the American people deserve a U.S. government that is more vigilant in doing the job. Well, if they continue to capitulate to the pressure from these universities, they see a big fat cash cow from these foreign students, and they don't want any responsibility to ensure that there's compliance with the law.
Yeah, these students represent a $12 billion cash influx into the U.S. Because they pay the top tuition fees to the colleges and universities that they show up at. Mr. Hooper, let me ask you about this, considering the fact that the U.S. does have legitimate security concerns here, and they're trying to address them, and maybe trying to do so in the fairest manner possible. How is it that you can avoid what it is you're concerned about when you consider that Al-Qaeda is a group that does not represent just one particular nation, not even just one particular region of the world? It's a group that basically crosses a number of borders. So how can you go after a group like that without actually stepping on some toes like this?
Well, I think a main point, too, is that the horrific attacks of September 11th would not have been prevented by this system. I think
well, do we know that for sure?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that these people would have found some way to do their deed, whatever it was. So I don't think just saying, oh, if we had only had them in a tracking system, this would have been prevented. I don't think that's the case. And again, it goes back to the issue of whether you believe racial and ethnic profiling is good. We happen to believe it's not good, and it's counterproductive, and it's not effective.
Well, there's one other issue as well before you start, Mr. Stein. There's one other matter besides the racial matter here. The fact that we're hearing from people who are inside the administration themselves, they don't have enough manpower to do what's being required here. And it may end up requiring something like pulling back on the Border Patrol, that operation right now at work on the border of Mexico that's been there to stop illegal immigration and drug flow into the country. Is it worth stemming the efforts in those directions to address this particular matter?
Look, we're a country with a multi-trillion-dollar budget. We are not spending anything like the finances required to monitor the movement of people coming into this country. 500 million people crossing U.S. borders every year. We are trying to have an immigration policy on the cheap. If we're going to get serious about trying to control immigration in a modern world of billions of people who want to move into a country like the United States, we need a heck of a lot more money than what the president's talking about, and a whole lot more than what we're seeing right now in Congress to get the job done. Right now we have a system where people simply don't obey the rules. Immigrants know it. They know our whole system is in a shambles, and we need a response commensurate with the crisis we're facing. All
right, we're going to have to go right now, but we thank you very much for your time, gentlemen. Ibrahim Hooper and Dan Stein, thank you. This is just the first of many conversations to come on this topic.